Welcome to the Codependency Inside Out podcast with your host, counselor and trauma recovery coach, AJ Mahari. This podcast will explain and examine codependency's many traits and painful relational challenges and why you need a healthy relationship to and with yourself, as well as why it's important to get into a healing and recovery process. Please visit ajmahari.ca to purchase and book sessions with AJ Mahari.
Some of the key core challenges for those with codependency include someone who has lost a connection to his or her core self, which this usually does take place in childhood to begin with, so that results in a person's thinking and behavior revolving around someone or something, often maybe both, that's external. So this can include a person, a substance, an activity, or perhaps an addiction. But codependency is not just only all about addiction, as it was once believed. In codependency, the patterns of externalizing, of repetition compulsion cycles, of what was experienced in childhood that created the codependency are all about ways in which people with codependency are defending themselves and often not in a consciously aware way. It's like codependents are turned inside out. Instead of self-esteem, they have other esteem based on what others think and feel. Instead of meeting their own needs, people with codependency, they meet the needs of others. And instead of responding to their own thoughts and feelings, they react to the thoughts and feelings of others and feel responsible for the feelings and even thoughts or behaviors of others. So it's kind of like a haywire situation in the system of people with codependency, because people with codependency have to control others to feel okay. And this is a really core issue. This comes from childhood. This is not something that you need to feel. It's not a blaming statement. It's not a shaming statement. It's the inculcation of what you experienced as somebody who might identify or need to understand that you would be best to understand and identify that you may well have codependency. So these challenges are pretty formidable. And so let me just repeat that again, that people with codependency, some of these formidable challenges is that instead of responding to their own thoughts and feelings, they react to those of others. And people with codependency, unbeknownst to themselves in any conscious way, unless they seek some help and some healing and recovery process and identify that they are codependent and stop denying said, it's really difficult to change this sort of haywire system, because people with codependency need to control others so that they can feel okay. But that just makes matters worse. It doesn't really work. And it leads to conflict and pain. And it also makes emotional intimacy difficult. And then there's the issue of attachment style in codependency, which is important, but which I would advocate and say, with 32 years working with clients, that it's not the first thing to focus on, because there's so much else to focus on. And many people with codependency have a fear of abandonment as well. And some people criticize what could be called maybe like the codependency movement and say that it's created more loneliness. What's this argument based on? Well, that relationships are nurturing and that we're naturally meant to be dependent, which isn't the case at all, because we're meant to be independent, individuated. We need to be adulted emotionally and know ourselves. We're meant to have a healthy, functional relationship to and with self. And in codependency, there is this dysfunctional, interrupted sort of dysfunctional relationship to and with self. And so much gets externalized out. The point is that codependent relationships are not only painful, but can be unsupportive and to varying degrees, very destructive. So a codependent core challenge, along with everything I've already said, is receiving the good stuff that relationships can potentially offer, because codependents are so busy trying to receive that good stuff the way that they learned in childhood and may have never received, quote, the good stuff, had their needs met, or might have been lacking nurture. Then this is what codependents externalize out in repetition compulsion cycles of the reenactment of whatever caused the codependency, each codependent's childhood. So receiving the good stuff can be a problem because codependents have learned from childhood in various many ways and to various different reasons, with adverse experience or trauma or unmet needs or a combination thereof, that they need to externalize out, give, overgive, pursue, chase, rescue, try to fix, enable another person to get the good stuff that a relationship could potentially offer. And of course, a lot of people with codependency end up relating to cluster Bs and in relationships with cluster Bs, and they don't give back. And then the whole thing just doesn't work, and it's very painful. So there's a stark difference between a codependent relationship and a healthy, independent relationship, between healthy caregiving and codependent caretaking, and understanding the boundaries between responsibility for yourself and responsibility to others, something that eludes people with codependency until they get into a healing and recovery process. And not all people with codependency are caretakers, but if you are one, you have a hard time listening to other people's problems without trying to help, offering to help, going out of your way to help, forgetting all about yourself and your own needs, or thinking that not so important. You just really want to help somebody else. That's a lot of enabling or trying to rescue or fix. And sometimes people with codependency even feel responsible and guilty for their own feelings, because the other person's feelings surely must matter more. But again, that's a learned perspective, a learned externalizing out from childhood, a focus on and feeling responsible for the other person's feelings. And this creates high reactivity for couples who constantly are blaming each other for their own feelings and defending themselves when their partner shares his or her feelings. And there can be different types of relationships, but if you're with a borderline or a narcissist, or you have been and you're codependent, then there's going to be a lot of blame coming from the person with BPD. And maybe people with codependency have a way of blaming them back, but is it so erroneous? Well, not really. But there's a component of it that people with codependency need to realize might be their responsibility. A component of the blaming back, right? Not what anyone has done to you or how anyone may have abused you. So there can be this blame going back and forth. Yeah, even people with codependency can be trying to defend their own feelings, defending themselves, but maybe not so much when they hear how somebody else feels, and then start focusing on that, which is self-abandonment. So what's missing? Another real challenge in codependency is what's missing is a sense of separateness between the person with codependency and where they need emotional boundaries and the other person or other people sometimes. Boundaries simply mean that your thoughts and feelings belong to you. Emotional boundaries, that is. So it's like quote, I'm not responsible for them. I didn't make you feel them. And then, unquote, for real intimacy to happen, you need to have a sense of separate identity and feel safe enough to express your feelings without being afraid of criticism or rejection or abuse or the other, the various things that borderlines and narcissists do. And that to some degree or other you have experienced in childhood, and it can be very similar because you might have had a borderline or narcissistic parent, or it can just be similar and maybe for different reasons because maybe you didn't have a cluster B parent. The core issue of codependent low self-esteem means that there's a fragile sense of self. Codependents are afraid of rejection and abandonment, but on the flip side, they fear losing themselves when they get attached in a relationship because that attachment won't be secure. And of course, cluster Bs have disorganized attachment. They tend to give up their needs, codependents do, to accommodate the partner, sometimes letting go of outside friends and activities they really used to enjoy. And even when the relationship isn't working, they're stuck like glue. The more the relationship isn't working, the harder the codependent's going to try and fight for this relationship to work, try to fix the issues, the problems, then what's going on that could be largely about a partner in a cluster B relationship. And also, a lot of people who have codependency aren't even in relationships, contrary to what people might have really thought if they stop to think about it, because they're afraid of losing their independence, which you don't really lose in a healthy interdependent relationship. But I would say you definitely do lose if you're with a borderline or a narcissist. And another big challenge is that many codependents have to dance a tightrope of pursuing partners, but never really catching them. Or you might think you caught the borderline, right? This is great. But then it turns out they're not who you really thought they were. So did you really catch them? Did you really, was there really that connect? It turns out there really wasn't. What you thought was happening there wasn't really what was really real, but you didn't know any better at the time. And so when you don't really catch the partner as a codependent, then people with codependency can distance themselves, but not really leave, or find it very difficult to leave a relationship, even an abusive cluster B relationship. It's a two-step kind of dance that's even done in marriages, but creates constant pain, tension, conflict or lack thereof, depending, in the relationship. Could be a lot of silence with a quiet borderline, for example, and somebody with codependency just, feels lost for what to do with this other person and their feelings and can't find any emotional safety there for yourself through this person. Fleeting moments of closeness are just enough to keep the dance going. And that's what happens for so many with codependency who are in a relationship with a borderline or a narcissist. And another big challenge for people with codependency is communication. Communication is this other area where dependents or codependents have a dilemma. They can't say no, or you really might feel uncomfortable and guilty if you try to say no. So people with codependency can become really resentful when they feel like they have to say yes to things they would rather not do, or that they don't agree with. And this is because many people with codependency avoid taking positions at all costs due to their fear of rejection. Like clever politicians, they don't want to say anything that might upset someone else, because people with codependency, another key core challenge is that you care way too much about, and you are kind of defined by, how others think about you. The thing is, with codependency, the lack of boundaries in general, lack of emotional boundaries, fragile sense of self, which isn't fragile like the borderline, or the narcissist, but there is a false self in codependency. and a separation from self. And that's why there's this inner child that needs to be integrated in a healing and recovery process, reparented, integrated, and you need to get the family of origin out of you. And people with codependency need to learn to be assertive, how to set boundaries, and how to handle any type of abuse. But verbal abuse is a key one, because that's likely where most abusers begin, is verbally. And people with codependency can practice saying no on their own, but codependents are always explaining and justifying themselves. And I always, when I heard this years ago myself, decades ago now, but it was beautiful. It was so powerful in my own journey in healing from codependency, is that no can be a complete sentence. You don't have to worry about, like, what am I going to say? How am I going to, no because I can't, and then maybe you don't want to tell a lie, right? You don't want to say, well, I'm really busy, when you're not. And so no can be a complete sentence. And people with codependency, another key core challenge, spend far too much of their precious lives, as I alluded to before, worrying about things and people over which they have no control, which includes what people think of you, whether they like you or not. Healing from codependency starts with getting to know yourself better, learning how to focus on yourself, learning how to honor yourself, and how to express yourself. And individuation is key in this, and more in the emotional arena, there's more adulting work to do as well. And people with codependency need to start doing things that make you happy, rather than deferring to others or waiting for someone else to make you happy, which that goes back to childhood again. When as a child, there might have been unmet needs, or could have been trauma, whatever the case in each person's experience. But we do look, as young children, we do look to a parent to kind of make us happy, entertain me, like interact with me, make me laugh, like, so that's where that comes from. It's something you need to take responsibility for today and start to work on and heal. But it's not something that was ever your fault. And building a relationship with yourself is really key. That leaves you no time to worry about someone over whom you have no control at all. You might think this is selfish. I've heard this from so many clients. I've had so many clients try to convince me that they're narcissists. They're like, well, isn't it narcissistic to care about myself? It's so selfish. I think I'm narcissistic, or I think I'm a narcissist, when they really aren't. I mean, there are, some narcissists, covert narcissists, some clients I've had where, yeah, they've had some traits of NPD as well, but that's not the case for most people with codependency. And it's not selfish to focus on yourself, and it's not narcissistic. And you need to learn how to love yourself, and I know that sounds so trite, like it's overused language, but you need to learn also that how you get to know yourself better is then going to, when you become independent, overflow onto everyone you interact with. And you will want to interact with likely a lot of new people than you did once you get to being independent and healing and recovering from codependency. So just some challenges or some key core problems that codependents are dealing with and often might not be aware of for a time. And that's just a sort of quick rundown, because there's so much more. There's still so much more in depth to talk about how does codependency really affect people, and all these key core issues, and then breaking down, at least when I'm working with clients, looking at and really understanding, and then changing the negative core beliefs and, the interjections and the injunctions of parents, and how that can wound a child. What an abuser, or what a parent who doesn't even, maybe isn't abusing on purpose, what a critical parent or an emotionally unavailable parent and or an abusive parent, what they will say to you that is so negative, children don't have any defense against it, and it becomes your narrative inside, and it's not your truth. And so that's another thing that is a big part of the process of this self-integration and shadow work of healing codependency and of finding your truth and finding yourself and knowing yourself, instead of just sort of knowing yourself through the inner critic and what you've taken in from negativity, constant criticism, emotionally unavailable parents, and or in other ways, abusive parents, which is really where the roots of codependency do lie. So there's a lot going on for people with codependency, and it's not the same for everyone, because there are people that have even way more going on than I've just briefly mentioned here. But these are some key core challenges that people with codependency have to realize, that it's time, if you're not already in a process of healing, recovery, working with someone, I'm out here to help you if I resonate with you, to really start to remedy and heal and change these key core issues so that you can indeed heal and become a healthier, happier, more bounded, assertive individual, adulting, more adulted, and an independent person. And that does take a lot of work to get the family of origin out of you. Hope that was helpful. Hope that gives some food for thought. And again, remember, codependency isn't a blame word. It isn't a bad word. It isn't a shaming word. It is a descriptor or a quote label for a lot of things that need to be described for people to better understand it. And it's not something that is your fault, right? But now, as an adult, it is your responsibility to hey, if you're in a relationship with a borderline or a narcissist, you got to get out of that, whatever's going on. Or if you're not entering into relationships because it's just a little too scary, and perhaps you're more, anxious avoidant in sort of attachment style, and so there's a lot of other issues aside from what I just mentioned here. But just know that everything really can be worked out and worked through, and that you really can change, and you really can heal. And codependency is one formidable mental health challenge that can be agonizingly painful, in which people have then a very inflamed, overactive inner critic, which is the voice of the abusive parent, critical parent, emotionally unavailable parent who said maybe some negative things. And so part of the healing recovery journey is getting in there and changing that narrative and reframing those negative core beliefs, which takes time, takes work, but it's reparenting the inner child as well, and that self-integration work, like I said. So there are lots of challenges within codependency, and I hope you can respect what I'm saying and the way I'm saying it. Please do be aware that if you identify with codependency, and maybe just finding this out, or maybe you've known this for a while and you've been working on it for a while, maybe you're making a lot of progress, the fact is that a mental health issue. So I don't think it needs to be pathologized, but there's already somebody out there who's called it self-love deficit disorder. And there is a deficit in self-love and in knowing yourself in a healthy and functional relationship to and with yourself. But I don't know that that really has to be pathologized as a disorder. So anyway, for those still who might be in denial or thinking, nah, I'm not really codependent because I don't do this or I don't do that, because the thing is, not everybody's going to have every codependent trait. And I'll be talking about what are codependent traits coming up soon, and adding in some things that I've learned over 32 years of working with clients. And yes, I have the lived experience of having been extremely codependent. And another key thing in codependency recovery is increasing your emotional literacy, because this whole process of healing recovers. Sometimes people will say, like in comments back to, like on the YouTube channel that I have, or my main channel, if you're starting to identify with this and this is new to you, the key thing is to be kind to yourself, not hard on yourself. Don't feel bad about yourself and blaming yourself, because this was created, the roots of codependency are in childhood. And you know what? People can't always know what's happening for them, and sometimes for a long time in life, and that's very painful. But the key thing is that you can change and you can heal. And so as you get more information, and if you happen to be in denial, and maybe codependency really is something you need to look at and examine and get into a healing recovery journey for, then it's important to realize that when we know better, we can do better. And so don't be judging yourself for how your life might have gone so far, or what kind of relationships you've had so far, or if you might be right now involved with somebody with, who's just really toxic and or abusive, whether they have BPD or NPD, or whether they have patterns of SAID or traits of SAID, and maybe wouldn't be fully diagnosable. And then, of course, there's just the overall stress in life. So there's the macrocosm that sort of sits over top of the layer of interpersonal microcosm experience. It goes all the way back to childhood and continues to affect people all through their adulthood if they don't come to realize what's happening. So that's just some key core challenges that are involved in what codependency really is and means. And I'll have much more coming. And as always, take care.
Thank you for listening to the Codependency Inside Out podcast with your host, counselor and trauma recovery coach, AJ Mahari. You may want to also subscribe to the Codependency Inside Out YouTube channel at youtube.com/user/AJM Mahari. And if you would like to work with AJ on your codependency recovery journey, please visit ajmahari.ca.